Dell originally released the XPS 420 computer back in 2007. In its day, it was considered a pretty decent computer, but now it's barely faster than even a Raspberry Pi 5, a credit card-sized single-board computer that costs less than £100. This old thing started at $2,000, which is a lot more than I paid for it today. Free. We'll start by seeing what we actually have here, as the listing didn't mention anything about the specs. On the top, there's a small screen. This is what Dell called the XPS Mini View, a rebrand of Windows Sideshow. This screen allows you to view notifications, calendar, media controls, gadgets, etc. without even booting into Windows. You probably never heard of this because it was only on a select few devices and was phased out in later versions of Windows. Anyway, when it comes to I/O, the ports on this computer are quite dated, as there's no USB 3 ports or even any HDMI. There are also a few Firewire ports which are not very useful anymore, so we'll be stuck with USB 2 speeds and a video adapter. At least this computer has gigabit Ethernet, which I was not expecting, but it shouldn't be all that surprising as the computer was a high-end model in its day. Opening the thing up reveals some dusty components, but definitely not as bad as I was expecting. For some reason the optical drive was unplugged. My best guess is that they wanted to reduce noise. We don't know what's underneath the CPU heatsink, but I'm willing to bet that it's a Core 2 Quad Q6600, as these were very popular at the time. There's also an ATI Radeon card in here, which is so old it predates the AMD branding. Below that we can see a basic Wi-Fi adapter. There's no hard drive in the system, which was mentioned, but that's not a problem as I have a spare 120GB SSD. These can be picked up for as low as just £15 new and can seriously speed up an otherwise super slow computer. They're pretty much a requirement for modern OSs, which is what I plan to run on this PC. Upon checking the RAM, one of the sticks is 1GB in capacity, so assuming that they're all identical, we likely have 4GB of RAM. So now we have an idea of the specs of this computer, let's see if it actually works. And it boots. Now we know everything works, let's shut it off and clean this thing up. Now we've got all that dust out of the computer, let's install Windows. Now we're in an OS, let's finally see what kind of specs this PC has. Upon downloading GPU-Z, we can see that the GPU is a Radeon HD 3870. I tried to download some drivers, but there's no support for Windows 10. I guess we'll just be stuck on whatever driver Windows installed. Checking out CPU-Z, we can see that the CPU is in fact a Q6600 running at 2.4 GHz. Moving on to software, I'm going to install Cinebench, Passmark, a Minecraft launcher, Steam, MSI Afterburner, and finally Geekbench to get an idea of what this system is capable of. Starting with Cinebench, it kind of refused to load. We're off to a great start. Moving on to Passmark, it actually loaded. I started the overall benchmark to test everything in the system. The score wasn't great. We got a rating of 492.2, which means our computer is at the bottom 4% of all of the PCs tested on Passmark. Upon checking the graphics score, we see that we only got 8 points. I think this must be a driver issue because Passmark didn't even recognize the card. After Passmark, I ran Geekbench 6. The processor scored 272 single core and 813 multi-core. Putting that in perspective, an iPad mini 4 got double the single core score and very close to the multi-core score. The iPad has an A8 chip in it, originally released on the iPhone 6 in 2014. That is crazy, considering that chip would draw a tiny fraction of what this Core 2 quad draws. Enough about these benchmarks though, we want to see if you can actually use this for real life tasks. Starting off with web browsing, I'm installing an ad blocker, H.264 which improves the YouTube playback, and a cookie blocker to give this computer a fighting chance against the modern web. Let's start off with browsing Reddit, a fairly simple task. The experience was absolutely fine, the images loaded quickly, I had absolutely nothing bad to say about it, other than maybe the comment section was a little slow to load. eBay was perfect, no problems at all again. All content loaded quickly, pages loaded quickly, it was indistinguishable from a modern machine really. Moving on to YouTube, 720p playback was perfect, no drop frames at all. Switching over to 1080p though, there's definitely a problem. No frames at all are being rendered, the video is just a still image. This is definitely a driver problem because the GPU should at least be able to play it somewhat. Also, disabling H.264 didn't change anything. I decided to test out ChatGPT just for fun, and unsurprisingly, it ran with no issues whatsoever. I was a little concerned about the RAM as we only have 4 GB. Checking Task Manager, sure enough, most of it was used with just a few tabs open, but you could switch between them without reloading at least. Changing gears into gaming, Minecraft was complicated. There were dotted white lines on every border of every block, and occasionally the textures would kind of disappear and then stretch. I'm not really sure how to describe it. The frame rate was a little all over the place, so I kept it at 30 and it ran somewhat smoothly. Flying with an elytra was too much for the CPU to handle, as you'd often find yourself flying into unloaded chunks and then crashing as a mountain pops out of nowhere right in front of you. I tried BeamNG, but it needed a GPU with at least DirectX 11 support, and as our GPU only supported DirectX 10, it didn't launch. A similar problem occurred when Counter-Strike 2 wanted a CPU with the SSE 4.2 instruction set. After a while, Euro Truck Simulator did launch, but none of the textures loaded, including the mouse pointers, so the UI was just a black square with some text on it that you can't actually tell if your mouse is anywhere near because your mouse is black as well. Eventually, I managed to load into a game, but nothing was being rendered, so it was all just a black screen again, at least until it crashed. So, should you buy this thing? Well, at the current prices, definitely not. The cheapest I could find one listed for was £80 with the same specs as mine. Filtering by sold, you can see that people are actually buying this computer, which is quite crazy to me. Well, if you're in need of a PC and you're on a budget, what should you get? Well, I would buy something like this, an older Dell Optiplex. This one has twice as much RAM, is much smaller, has a much faster processor, is 5 years newer, and is somehow cheaper than the XPS 420. Here's another very similar PC for a very similar price. These are not hard to find. If you wanted something newer, you can get a slightly younger Optiplex with 16 GB of RAM and a 6th gen i5 for just £20 more. This is still somehow cheaper than my XPS 420. In fact, this is exactly what I've done. I've recently bought an HP ProDesk with a 7th gen i5 and an SSD for just £40. I have an interesting video idea for this, so make sure to stay tuned. So, in conclusion, the Dell XPS 420 is alright for general web browsing in 2024, but who knows what it might be like in a few years' time. This computer's days are numbered, as we have multiple incompatibilities and driver issues due to the age of the computer. If I had to use this computer daily, I would definitely upgrade the ancient GPU to something that has modern driver and API support. The lack of USB 3 and USB Type-C on this PC is also a problem, so I had installed a PCIe card to get some modern I/O. I guess that brings me to the end of the video, so I'll see you in the next one.